Story. After a night with his mistress, the millionaire returns. Pregnant wife tosses his ring into his glass before we begin. This fictional story is for entertainment, not legal or financial advice. Stay until the end as a husband faces a truth harder than revenge. Subscribe if you believe change is proven through actions. Sometimes the loudest goodbye is spoken without a single word. The city shimmered beneath a blanket of midnight lights as Ethan Mercer guided his black luxury sedan into the underground garage of the Manhattan penthouse he called home. His tailored tuxedo still carried the faint scent of expensive cologne mixed with unfamiliar perfume, while the congratulatory applause from the charity banquet echoed in his memory. To everyone else, Ethan Mercer was the billionaire who had everything: a thriving technology empire, an enviable public image, and a beautiful wife expecting their first child. Only he knew the evening had not ended at the gala. It had ended in a private hotel lounge with Natalie Voss, a consultant whose firm held a major Mercer Technologies contract. Their relationship had crossed a line months earlier. Ethan had never disclosed it to the board, and several private dinners had been charged to a corporate travel account. He adjusted his cufflinks in the private elevator, rehearsing the smile that had carried him through difficult conversations. Claire would probably be asleep. 7 months into her pregnancy, she tired easily. By morning, everything would return to normal. Or so he believed. The elevator doors slid open into a silent penthouse wrapped in soft amber light. No television, no music, no footsteps, only the quiet ticking of an antique clock resting above the marble fireplace. "Claire," Ethan called gently. No answer. He loosened his bow tie and walked farther inside. Then he saw her. Claire Whitmore stood alone beside the polished marble bar overlooking the glittering skyline. Her long platinum blonde hair rested neatly over one shoulder. A pale blue maternity dress flowed softly around her growing belly, and one hand rested protectively against the child she carried. Her face looked calm, almost impossibly calm. That frightened him more than tears ever could. "You should be resting," Ethan said with a practiced smile. Claire slowly turned toward him. Her bright blue eyes searched his face, not with anger, but with quiet understanding. For several long seconds, neither of them spoke. The silence seemed to stretch across every memory they had ever shared. Without lowering her gaze, Claire gently reached for Ethan's left hand. He frowned, confused. Before he could react, she carefully slid his wedding ring from his finger. Her movements were delicate, respectful, almost loving. She looked down at the crystal whiskey glass waiting on the marble counter. A single amber cube of ice floated inside. Then, clink, the wedding band disappeared beneath the whiskey with one soft metallic sound. The tiny ripple faded almost immediately, but something far greater had already broken. Ethan stared at the glass. "What are you doing?" Claire folded her hands over her stomach. "I think," she said quietly, "that's where it belongs tonight." His heartbeat stumbled. "Claire, listen." She shook her head once. "No explanations. I can explain everything." "I know." Her answer surprised him. "I know exactly where you were." His carefully rehearsed confidence disappeared. The room suddenly felt smaller. The city beyond the windows continued glowing with millions of lights, indifferent to the collapse unfolding inside the apartment. Claire stepped toward the window. "I spent years believing loyalty could protect a marriage," she whispered. She smiled sadly as she looked at their reflection in the glass. "I finally understand something different." Ethan swallowed. "What do you mean?" She rested one hand over the life growing inside her. "Promises aren't broken the moment someone lies." She paused. "They're broken long before that." The words settled heavily between them. Ethan opened his mouth again, searching for something, an excuse, an apology, a reason, but every sentence felt smaller than the silence surrounding them. Claire never raised her voice. She never accused him. She never cried. Instead, she looked at the whiskey glass one final time before quietly walking toward the hallway leading to the nursery that was almost ready for their son. Ethan remained alone beside the marble counter. The wedding ring rested beneath the amber liquid, distorted by the crystal glass, close enough to touch, yet somehow impossibly out of reach. For the first time in many years, the billionaire who believed he could solve every problem with confidence, influence, or money realized that some losses begin long before anyone notices, and some moments can never be undone. There are moments when the truth doesn't arrive with a confession. It waits patiently inside a locked drawer. Morning sunlight spilled across the penthouse, painting long golden lines across the marble floor. The city outside had already awakened, but inside the apartment, silence remained the loudest sound. Ethan Mercer hadn't slept. The whiskey glass still rested on the bar exactly where Claire had left it. Beneath the amber liquid, his wedding ring caught the morning light, distorted by the crystal walls that separated it from his fingertips. He reached toward it more than once during the night, but every time his hand stopped halfway. Picking it up would change nothing. Across the hall, the nursery door stood slightly open. Tiny white shelves waited for children's books. A wooden rocking chair faced the window. A mobile of silver stars hung peacefully above the crib, moving gently whenever the air conditioner stirred. Claire was already awake. She stood beside the nursery window, one hand resting against her growing belly while watching the first families walk through the park below. Parents pushed strollers. Children chased pigeons across the pavement. Ordinary lives unfolded without knowing another family had quietly reached its breaking point. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Samuel Brooks stepped inside after the housekeeper showed him in. The experienced attorney carried a slim leather briefcase, his expression respectful rather than curious. "Good morning, Claire." She offered a faint smile. "Thank you for coming so early. I thought today might be difficult." "It is." Samuel carefully placed the briefcase on the dining table. "I've prepared everything." Claire looked at the closed case without opening it. Months earlier, she would never have imagined asking a lawyer to visit her home. She had believed trust was stronger than paperwork. Now paperwork was all that remained. Samuel unlocked the briefcase. Inside rested several neatly organized folders secured with colored tabs. Bank statements from shared accounts, trust records, letters, and signed agreements. Nothing came from stolen passwords, private recordings, or Ethan's personal devices. Each page represented a chapter he had never bothered to read. "You've reviewed everything?" Claire asked quietly. Samuel nodded. "Every document has been verified. If the company requests material, it will go through outside counsel, not the press. And none of this leaves this room unless absolutely necessary. You have my word." Claire slowly exhaled. "I never wanted any of this." "I know." Samuel had represented influential families for nearly 3 decades. He had witnessed hostile divorces, bitter inheritance battles, and public scandals. Yet very few clients reminded him of Claire. She wasn't searching for revenge. She was protecting what remained of her dignity. Across the apartment, Ethan finally emerged from the master bedroom. His tie was gone. His shirt remained wrinkled from the previous night. For a brief moment, he froze after noticing Samuel seated at the dining table. "A lawyer?" Ethan asked. Claire turned calmly. "Yes." "You've already hired a lawyer?" "I hired someone to help me understand the facts." His jaw tightened. "We can talk without attorneys. We've had years to talk." Neither voice rose above a conversation. That somehow made every word heavier. Ethan looked toward the folders. "What's in those?" Claire rested both hands over her stomach. "The truth." He almost laughed. "What truth?" "The one I never needed until now." Samuel quietly gathered one folder, but made no move to hand it over. Claire stopped him with a gentle shake of her head. "Not yet." Samuel understood immediately. Evidence carried weight. Timing carried power. Some truths achieved more by remaining unopened than by being revealed too soon. Claire met Ethan's eyes one last time. "I don't want to destroy your life." He looked genuinely confused. "Then what do you want?" Her answer came without hesitation. "I want to stop pretending that mine was never broken." No accusation followed. No dramatic confrontation. Only another silence settled across the penthouse. Outside, the city continued moving forward. Inside, Claire realized something unexpected. She no longer feared whatever came next. Because for the first time in a very long time, she wasn't carrying the burden alone. The documents remained closed upon the table, their contents hidden, their existence undeniable. And somewhere beyond those unopened pages rested a story Ethan Mercer had never imagined would one day become the measure of everything he stood to lose. Every great empire has a foundation. Sometimes, the person who built it is the one history forgets first. Ethan Mercer spent the rest of the morning inside his corner office overlooking Manhattan. Meetings came and went. Executives discussed acquisitions. Investors praised quarterly growth. and assistants hurried through glass corridors carrying reports worth millions of dollars. He heard almost none of it. Claire's words followed him like an echo. I want to stop pretending that mine was never broken. For the first time in years, the polished office around him felt strangely unfamiliar. Every framed award, every magazine cover displaying his photograph, every congratulatory plaque celebrated one story: that Ethan Mercer had built an empire through extraordinary vision. He had repeated that story so many times that he had almost forgotten where it truly began. Across the city, Claire sat quietly in Samuel Brooks' office. The lawyer placed a single cream-colored folder on the conference table. "This one," he said softly, "contains the earliest records." Claire rested her fingertips on the cover, but didn't open it immediately. "I haven't looked at these in years. Perhaps today is the right day." She nodded. As the folder opened, time itself seemed to move backward. 8 years earlier, a much younger Ethan stood inside a tiny rented workspace above an old coffee shop in Brooklyn. 3 folding desks occupied the room. Extension cords crossed the wooden floor. The company consisted of only 4 people, one unreliable internet connection, and a dream that investors politely called unrealistic. Claire remembered those days perfectly. She had worked full-time as an architectural designer, while Ethan spent endless nights writing software that almost no one believed would succeed. He never complained. Neither did she. When their savings disappeared, Ethan quietly began preparing to abandon the company. "I can't keep asking you to sacrifice," he had told her one rainy evening. "We'll find another way." He never knew she already had. Claire had inherited a modest family trust established years before by her late grandfather. It wasn't enough to make anyone famous, but it represented generations of careful planning and quiet responsibility. She never viewed it as personal wealth. She viewed it as hope. Instead of giving Ethan the money directly, she asked Samuel to structure a confidential investment through a private holding company. The agreement protected Ethan's pride while providing the capital necessary to keep his young business alive. The documents were completely legal, entirely confidential, and known only to 3 people: Claire, Samuel, the trustee. Ethan never discovered the source. Months later, a breakthrough contract transformed the struggling startup into a rapidly growing technology company. Investors arrived. New offices followed. Recognition came quickly. Success came even faster. Eventually, the quiet beginning disappeared beneath headlines celebrating Ethan's remarkable rise. Claire never corrected anyone. When journalists praised Ethan as a self-made billionaire, she simply smiled from the audience. Not because the story was entirely true, but because she loved the man telling it. Back in Samuel's office, Claire carefully closed the folder. "I never wanted recognition." "I know," Samuel replied. "You could have told him years ago. I wanted him to believe in himself." Samuel studied her expression. "And now?" She looked through the window toward the crowded streets below. "I don't need him to know what I gave." She paused, her voice steady. "But he needs to understand what he chose to lose." At nearly the same moment, Ethan stood alone before the massive glass wall of his executive office. He watched thousands of people moving through the city far beneath him. Somewhere inside his memory, forgotten pieces slowly began fitting together. Conversations, unexpected opportunities, anonymous funding that had arrived at exactly the right moment. Questions he had never thought to ask. For the first time in many years, certainty gave way to doubt. And doubt, once invited inside, rarely leaves without revealing the truth hidden beneath everything that came before. The first crack in an empire is rarely made by enemies. More often, it begins with a question no one expected to ask. Monday morning arrived with its usual rhythm inside Mercer Technologies. Glass elevators carried executives between floors. Digital displays flashed stock prices. Employees hurried through spotless corridors, believing another successful week had begun. But behind the polished surface, something had changed. Ethan Mercer noticed it the moment he entered the executive boardroom. The conversation stopped a fraction of a second too early. Several directors exchanged restrained glances before returning their attention to neatly organized briefing folders. Normally, the atmosphere welcomed him. Today, it measured him. Margaret Lawson, the chairwoman of the board, offered a polite smile. "Good morning, Ethan." "Morning." She folded her hands. "Before today's agenda, we have one additional matter." Ethan took his seat. "What kind of matter?" The governance committee has requested an internal leadership review. The room became unusually still. Ethan frowned. A review? A compliance officer reported an undisclosed relationship involving a major vendor, Margaret answered. The committee is reviewing travel expenses and the vendor selection process. Ethan's jaw tightened. Natalie's firm was selected by management. That may be true, Margaret said. The issue is whether the board received the information it needed. He leaned back. So this is an investigation. It is a review, not a verdict. The wording lingered in the room. Hope, not certainty. Across the city, Claire slowly walked through a quiet botanical garden near the river. The spring air carried the scent of fresh flowers, and sunlight filtered gently through rows of blooming trees. Samuel matched her pace without speaking for several moments. You've heard about the review, he finally said. Claire nodded. I expected it. You didn't request it. No. She looked toward a young couple pushing a stroller along the path. Truth has its own timing. Samuel studied her expression. She still wasn't celebrating. She wasn't waiting for Ethan to fail. She simply refused to protect choices that no longer deserve protection. Meanwhile, inside Mercer Technologies, the committee began requesting records. Major acquisitions, executive travel, risk assessments, approval procedures. Nothing dramatic, nothing accusatory, only facts. For years, Ethan had signed hundreds of documents without imagining anyone would someday revisit them one by one. His chief financial officer entered his office carrying another stack of files. The committee wants these before tomorrow. Outside counsel has issued a preservation notice. Ethan accepted the folders. Who reported this? The policy protects that employee, she said. Ethan looked down. He had praised the ethics program for years. Now he had to respect it when it examined him. After she left, Ethan remained standing beside his desk. For the first time since founding the company, he realized that confidence alone could no longer settle every concern. Reputation required evidence. Leadership required accountability. That afternoon, financial analysts began discussing Mercer Technologies on business networks. Nothing alarming, nothing sensational, simply cautious observations about governance reviews and executive oversight. The company's share price barely moved, but uncertainty had entered the conversation. And uncertainty often traveled faster than certainty ever could. As evening approached, Ethan returned to the penthouse. The apartment remained peaceful. Claire sat in the living room, quietly knitting a small blue blanket for the baby. She didn't ask about his day. She already sensed the weight he carried. After several minutes of silence, Ethan spoke. The board opened a review. Claire gently placed the blanket on her lap. I heard. You seem unsurprised. She looked at him with calm blue eyes. Responsibility eventually asks every leader the same question. And what question is that? She answered softly. What did your success cost? Neither of them spoke again. Outside, the city lights slowly appeared one by one, reflecting across the river like countless silent witnesses. Inside the penthouse, Ethan stared toward the skyline he had once believed belonged entirely to him. For years, he had measured his life through profits, rankings, and headlines. Now another measure had quietly arrived, one that couldn't be negotiated, one that couldn't be purchased. And somewhere beyond the walls of his office, behind carefully sealed records and forgotten decisions, the next piece of the truth was already making its way toward the boardroom. Power rarely disappears with a single dramatic moment. More often, it leaves quietly, one decision at a time. The special board meeting began precisely at 9 o'clock. Outside the headquarters of Mercer Technologies, reporters gathered behind security barriers, sensing that something important was unfolding. No official statements had been released, but financial media had already begun discussing the company's internal governance review. Inside the executive conference room, silence replaced the usual confidence. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Manhattan skyline, yet almost no one admired the view. Every seat around the long walnut table was occupied. Directors, legal advisors, independent auditors. Ethan Mercer entered last. He greeted the room with the same composed expression that had carried him through countless negotiations, but even he could feel the difference. Today, no one stood to congratulate him. Margaret Lawson opened the meeting. Thank you all for attending. A large screen illuminated behind her, displaying a simple title. Leadership Review Findings. No dramatic music. No accusations. Only facts. The lead auditor calmly summarized several weeks of interviews and document reviews. Operational oversight. Executive approval procedures. Internal governance recommendations. The review found no theft and made no criminal accusation. It confirmed that Ethan had failed to disclose his relationship with Natalie while her firm worked for the company. Several charges lacked a business purpose, and employees had assumed the founder should not be questioned. The report recommended reimbursement, termination of the consulting contract under its ethics clause, stronger controls, and transitional leadership. Margaret folded her hands. The committee believes these changes will best protect the long-term stability of the company. She turned toward Ethan. This is not punishment for an affair. It is accountability for non-disclosure, personal expenses, and a culture that discouraged challenge. Ethan nodded. The facts left him nowhere to hide. He had built Mercer Technologies from a tiny startup into an international corporation. Now the company was becoming larger than its founder. Ethan and his attorney had received the report the night before and were allowed to respond. With a quorum present, the corporate secretary recorded the discussion and the directors voted. The resolution passed by a clear majority. Margaret spoke gently. Effective immediately, executive authority will transition to an interim leadership committee. You will remain on the board as a non-executive strategic advisor, subject to the company's governing documents, and you will reimburse the unsupported expenses. No applause followed. No celebration. Only respectful silence. Ethan thanked the directors. His voice remained steady. I appreciate your honesty. For the first time in many years, he left the conference room carrying only a slim leather portfolio instead of leading the room that once revolved around him. Across town, Claire visited a neighborhood community center preparing weekend meals for families in need. Volunteers arranged fresh produce, while children colored pictures at nearby tables. Claire quietly helped organize food baskets despite her growing pregnancy. One volunteer smiled warmly. You should be resting. Claire laughed softly. This doesn't feel like work. Her phone vibrated. A short message from Samuel appeared. The board has completed today's vote. She read the sentence once, then gently locked the screen. She asked no questions. She celebrated nothing. Instead, she picked up another basket and carried it toward a young mother waiting near the entrance. Samuel arrived a short time later. You already know. Claire nodded. I do. Aren't you curious? I hope he's all right. Samuel looked at her with quiet surprise. After everything? Claire glanced toward the children laughing together across the room. Hurting people doesn't heal anyone. Outside the headquarters, Ethan walked alone through the busy streets without his usual security detail. For years, people had recognized him immediately. Today, hundreds passed without looking twice. He entered a small coffee shop he hadn't visited since the earliest days of his company. The owner, now older with silver hair, smiled kindly. Long time, Ethan. He smiled back. It has been. As he sat beside the window, memories returned. The borrowed desks. Late-night coding sessions. Dreams that once seemed impossible. Back then, success had meant building something worthwhile. Somewhere along the way, he had mistaken success for ownership. Watching strangers hurry past outside, Ethan finally understood that titles could be reassigned, offices could be emptied, and influence could fade. Only character remained when everything else was asked to leave. Some lives begin at the exact moment another life finally learns what truly matters. Rain tapped gently against the hospital windows as dawn slowly brightened the sky above Manhattan. Inside the maternity wing, nurses moved quietly through softly lit corridors, their calm voices blending with the distant rhythm of medical monitors. Claire Whitmore sat peacefully in her hospital room. Her overnight bag rested beside the bed. A tiny knitted blue blanket lay folded in the bassinet waiting near the window, the same blanket she had finished only days before. Samuel Brooks stood outside the room, speaking quietly with the attending physician before excusing himself to give Claire privacy. Everything was ready. Claire closed her eyes for a moment and placed both hands over her stomach. For months, she had carried more than a child. She had carried disappointment, questions, memories, and hope. Today, only one of those remained important. Across the city, Ethan Mercer sat alone inside his apartment overlooking the skyline. The penthouse felt unusually large without Claire's gentle presence. The nursery remained untouched. Small stuffed animals lined the shelves exactly as she had arranged them. He walked slowly into the room and rested one hand on the back of the wooden rocking chair. For weeks he had measured his losses through titles, meetings, and headlines. Standing there, he realized none of those compared to the distance growing between himself and the family he had almost taken for granted. His phone remained silent. He didn't expect it to ring. Back at the hospital, labor progressed steadily. Doctors offered calm encouragement while experienced nurses guided Claire through each contraction. She never complained. She focused only on the tiny heartbeat echoing through the monitor. Hours later, the room filled with a new sound. A baby's first cry. Clear, strong, full of life. Claire's eyes filled with quiet tears as the nurse carefully placed the newborn into her arms. "It's a healthy little boy," the doctor said warmly. For a long moment, the outside world disappeared. There were no boardrooms, no scandals, no broken promises. Only a mother looking into the eyes of her son for the very first time. She gently touched his tiny hand. "Hello," she whispered. "I've been waiting for you." The baby wrapped his fingers around hers. The gesture lasted only seconds. It felt eternal. Later that afternoon, Samuel stepped into the hallway and sent a brief message. "Mother and baby are healthy." No additional words. No photographs. No expectations. Several minutes later, Ethan's phone vibrated. He stared at the screen. His hands trembled almost imperceptibly. He read the message once. Then again. A son. Healthy. Safe. He slowly lowered himself onto the sofa, overwhelmed by emotions he struggled to name. Relief. Gratitude. Regret. He looked toward the nursery door, standing quietly open. The room that had once symbolized the future now reminded him how easily the future could have been lost. Without hesitation, he typed a short reply. "Thank you for letting me know. Please tell Claire that I hope they are both doing well." He erased 3 different apologies before sending only those simple words. Sometimes restraint carried more sincerity than speeches ever could. That evening, golden sunlight streamed through the hospital window. Claire gently rocked her sleeping son while watching the city glow beyond the glass. A nurse smiled as she entered. "Have you chosen his name?" Claire looked down at the peaceful little face resting against her chest. "Yes." She smiled softly. "His name is Liam." Outside, another ordinary evening settled over Manhattan. Traffic flowed through busy streets. Lights appeared across thousands of windows. Life continued as it always had. Yet inside one quiet hospital room, a new beginning had quietly replaced years of sorrow. And somewhere across the city, a father who had spent his life building a remarkable company finally understood that the greatest privilege he could ever earn would not be measured by wealth or influence, but by whether he proved worthy of hearing his son call him Dad one day. The strongest future is often built by people who choose to heal instead of remembering how they were hurt. 6 months passed. Spring returned to New York with blooming trees, longer afternoons, and parks once again filled with families enjoying the warmth after a long winter. Life had continued moving forward, carrying everyone with it. Claire Whitmore had changed with it. Every morning began before sunrise. Not because she had meetings to attend or headlines to chase, but because a cheerful 6-month-old named Liam greeted each day with curious blue eyes and a smile that erased exhaustion faster than sleep ever could. Motherhood had not made life easier. It had made every challenge worth facing. While Liam napped peacefully each afternoon, Claire devoted her remaining hours to a new project that had quietly grown from an idea into a meaningful mission. The Whitmore Family Foundation officially opened its Community Resource Center. The renovated building welcomed young families, single parents, and expectant mothers who needed guidance, childcare resources, financial education, or simply someone willing to listen without judgment. Claire insisted on one rule. No one who walks through these doors should ever feel ashamed for asking for help. Volunteers embraced the principle immediately. Within weeks, dozens of local families were attending parenting workshops, health consultations, and educational programs. Claire rarely stood at the front of the room. She preferred greeting visitors personally, carrying donated supplies, arranging children's books, or rocking babies while exhausted mothers completed paperwork. Many visitors never realized she was the founder. She preferred it that way. One sunny afternoon, Samuel Brooks stopped by the center carrying a folder. "I thought you'd like to see this." Claire accepted it with a curious smile. Inside were letters, dozens of handwritten notes. Some came from parents who had found stable housing. Others thanked the foundation for helping them return to school or begin new careers. One small drawing from a little girl showed a smiling woman holding a baby's hand beneath a bright yellow sun. Written carefully across the page were simple words. "Thank you for helping my mommy smile again." Claire quietly closed the folder. No award she had ever received carried greater meaning. Across town, Ethan Mercer was building a different kind of life. Without the relentless pace of executive leadership, his days became unexpectedly simple. He ended contact with Natalie, reimbursed the company, completed ethics training, and began counseling without asking Claire to reward him. He accepted invitations to mentor young entrepreneurs instead of leading corporate conferences. He volunteered his experience at university innovation programs. He listened more than he spoke. For the first time in decades, success was no longer measured by quarterly reports. It was measured by usefulness. One afternoon, while reading the business section of a newspaper inside his favorite neighborhood cafe, Ethan noticed a small article tucked into the corner of the page. Community Resource Center expands family programs. A familiar photograph accompanied the headline. Claire stood among smiling volunteers while holding Liam in her arms. No luxury, no publicity campaign, just genuine happiness. The cafe owner noticed him smiling. Good news. Ethan folded the newspaper carefully. The best kind. That evening, he drove past the foundation building on his way home, but did not stop. He had no scheduled visit, and new regret did not justify appearing unannounced. Children played in the courtyard while parents talked comfortably on nearby benches. Through the front windows, he caught a brief glimpse of Claire laughing as Liam reached toward colorful balloons near the reception desk. He continued driving. Some moments deserved to belong entirely to the people living them. As the sun slowly disappeared behind the skyline, Ethan quietly drove away with an unexpected feeling settling over him. Not loneliness, not regret alone. Hope. Because rebuilding trust, he finally understood, was never accomplished through grand gestures. It happened the same way strong families and meaningful communities were built. Patiently, consistently, one honest choice at a time. Some endings don't sound like applause. They sound like peace. Nearly a year had passed since the night a wedding ring disappeared into a glass of whiskey. The seasons had changed. So had the people. On a bright spring morning, the Whitmore Family Foundation celebrated the opening of a new children's learning garden beside its community center. Young trees lined the walking paths, colorful flowers surrounded wooden benches, and laughter drifted through the air as families gathered for the dedication ceremony. Claire Whitmore stood beneath a white canopy, holding little Liam on her hip. He had just learned to take his first unsteady steps. Each time he stumbled, he looked up at his mother, smiling with complete trust before trying again. Claire smiled back every single time, not because she could protect him from every fall, but because she could always encourage him to stand again. After the ceremony ended, guests slowly made their way through the garden. Volunteers packed away decorations while children chased bubbles floating across the grass. Samuel Brooks approached Claire. "There's someone waiting by the entrance." She followed his gaze. Ethan Mercer stood quietly beneath an old maple tree, holding a small wrapped children's book instead of flowers or expensive gifts. He wore no designer suit. No photographers followed him. No assistants waited nearby. Only a father hoping for an opportunity he knew he had not earned. Claire looked at Samuel. He simply nodded. "The decision is yours." After a long moment, Claire walked toward Ethan with Liam in her arms. Ethan greeted her with a respectful smile. "You both look wonderful." "Thank you." His attention shifted to the little boy. Liam looked back with innocent curiosity before reaching toward the colorful ribbon tied around the book. Ethan chuckled softly. "I thought he might enjoy this someday." Claire accepted the gift. "Thank you." There was no awkward argument. No dramatic apology. Only two people speaking more honestly than they ever had before. Ethan looked across the garden where dozens of families laughed together. "I used to believe success meant being the most important person in every room." Claire listened quietly. "I was wrong." He took a slow breath. "I spent years building a company." His eyes rested on Liam. "You built a future." For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Then Claire gently lowered Liam onto the grass. The little boy looked around excitedly before taking several uncertain steps. Halfway between his parents, he lost his balance. Instinctively, both Claire and Ethan reached forward. Liam giggled as each of them steadied him at the same moment. The child laughed, unaware of everything that had happened before he was born. He only knew that two familiar hands had caught him before he fell. Claire looked at Ethan. "We can't rewrite yesterday." "No, but we can choose what tomorrow looks like for Liam." Ethan nodded slowly. "I want to earn your trust as his father. I am not asking to restore our marriage." Their divorce had been finalized months earlier, and Ethan had earned more parenting time by following every condition and protecting Liam's routine. "Then keep doing the work," Claire said. She promised nothing more. Trust was never restored in a single conversation. It was rebuilt through ordinary days, consistent choices, and patient actions. As the afternoon sun settled across the garden, Ethan remained to help volunteers fold chairs and collect children's toys after the event. Nobody asked him to. Nobody applauded. He simply worked beside everyone else. When the last family headed home, Claire picked up Liam and looked once more across the peaceful garden. She no longer carried the weight of betrayal. She carried something far more valuable: freedom, hope, and the quiet confidence that kindness had never made her weak. It had made her strong enough to begin again. Because fortunes may build skylines, titles may open doors, and success may fill newspapers. But in the end, the legacy that lasts is measured by the lives we lift, the promises we keep, and the love we choose to protect when no one is watching.